Good afternoon, folks. This is the third of our webinar series on teaching the 2016 elections, and we hope this, again, like the other ones, will be an energizing one, and hopefully you'll get some good info from this. If anybody has trouble hearing this, hearing us talking, just write it down in the chat box. And what we're going to do today, last time we had people able to make comments from their computers, but what it looks to me that you find, folks, nobody here is on a computer with a mic. So if you folks want to just write in any comments as we go, any questions as we go, if you could write them in the chat box, and we'll be happy to get to them as soon as we can. So if you don't know how to get to the chat box, there's a thing at the top of your screen. Just there's this little scroll down thing, and one of them says chat, and you can just click on that and just write in and respond. So, yes.
Sorry, just a comment about the chat box. Just make sure that your messages are being sent to everybody. So make sure it's getting sent to all participants.
Right.
So that everyone can see what you're saying.
Yeah, don't just send them to me. Send them to all participants, unless you want it to go just to me. But other than that, just send them to all participants. Okay, so my name is Steve Armstrong. I'm the Social Studies Consultant for the State Department of Ed. And could the rest of the people on the panel today, would everybody identify, just tell everybody who you are?
Yeah, I'm Allison Norrie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a social studies teacher at Fairfield Ward High School in Fairfield, Connecticut, and I've been working with Steve for the better part of, I don't know, half a year on these webinars and election campaign units.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alyssa. I've also been working with Steve and Allison for the past couple months with these webinars and at the Department of Education. I am currently working towards my certification in elementary education, so welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Val McVeigh. I'm a board member for the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies, and I work for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is based in Orlando, Florida.
And Val, could you just tell people, the last couple webinars, we've had some folks from Florida on these, but what's the status down there today?
Well, today, everyone in Florida, I think, is getting ready for Hurricane Matthew, which is headed up the coast of the state. So I don't know that any of them are on the webinar today, but maybe for some future webinars.
Right. Okay, so our topic today, and we could, as we go through, again, I would really ask you if you have questions or observations to make, please make them, just write them in the chat box and we'll respond to them. But our topic today, our first topic today, these webinars, by the way, are designed to do, part of it is sort of instructional, part of it is in pedagogical, and part of it is, and part of it is providing resources. So all three of them have been this way, and the other one is also this will be the same. And could Allison or Alyssa, if you could respond to Dana, I don't know if you could see her comment on the chat box there. If somebody could respond to that. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I cannot.
All right, so we're going to talk today about a topic, why Americans hate the media is our first topic. And I don't know if I don't know if you agree with this, but public relations, any surveys given about this say Americans' opinion of the media right now is at an all-time low. I mean, it's been low, but right now it's at an all-time low. I'd be curious to know, to start off, if you could, if a couple people could, or everybody could go to the chat box and sort of write in, why do you think Americans don't trust the media and hate the media? So could somebody, if somebody could write that in, if that would be great. So my question, our first question that we'd like your opinion on today, is why Americans hate the media and don't trust the media. So if you could go, if you could go and write something in on that, it would be great. And I know this is like a class. On the first question, people are a little slow to respond. But Catherine says that they seem to be slanted for or against certain candidates. That's, Susan, that's absolutely the perception of many, many, many people. The media is disliked because of the bias of certain networks. Agree with you, Carrie. That's oftentimes an opinion that's given. So with that in mind, let's see what else we could say about this topic. Just a couple years, I mean, everybody, I'm guessing, has seen or heard of the famous 1962 press conference by Richard Nixon after he had been defeated as governor of California. A very, very bitter press conference when he says, you don't have Nixon to kick around anymore because, gentlemen, this is my last press conference. And if you've watched Donald Trump this year, has made many comments. If you watched his rallies, there's many comments, very negative comments toward the media. And Hillary Clinton supporters would argue that the media is not fair to her, that they're putting her on a different standard than anybody else. So certainly those complaints about the media have occurred in the past, and they're happening in 2016 as well. Hillary Clinton, you may remember, her hatred of the media or dislike of the media goes way back to when Bill Clinton was president. You may remember the term she used, the vast right-wing conspiracy, which certainly included members of what she perceived at the time of the conservative media. Only 4 of 10 Americans even give the media credit for being fair. As a couple of people, Carrie and Susan and a couple of people said before, the biggest complaint is the media has a slant to what they say. Many people criticize the media for sort of mixing celebrities and news, that what the media really wants to talk about are not issues. That, you know what, the media would rather show Donald Trump at a rally going nuts or Hillary Clinton saying something far more than a substantive discussion of issues. And you know why that is, because if they had a substantive discussion of issues, probably viewership would go down. Now, how has the media changed in the last 40 years? Let's be honest. As you know, if you live in a town, perhaps the staffs on many newspapers, some newspapers are closed. The staffs on many newspapers are much smaller. They're not doing as good a job as following politics as they once did. All major institutions are having a loss of trust. And you know what? As media becomes more democratic, you know, there's a plus and a minus to that. You know what? I can be a reporter. I can go out and take my iPhone out. I can start to be a newsman and report some event. But you know what? As media becomes more democratic, some media isn't that good. That the filtering, the editing that takes place in traditional journalism in some cases just doesn't happen today. The television, whatever network you watch, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever network you watch, it's desperately, ratings desperately decide what's being shown. And, you know, if you're a liberal and you're watching MSNBC, you know, you may complain, oh, Donald Trump, he's on the TV too much. Well, if you remember a year ago, in the summer, last summer, they were showing Donald Trump as often as they could. So, and why was that? Because of ratings. Profits now drive news coverage and news media. And to be honest with you, I mean, some of you that are political junkies can have some, some of these. There's many websites that make no attempt to be objective. There's not even a sense. As a result of all this, media as a whole is judged in a negative light. Val, Allison, Alyssa, any additional comments on this from your end?
Nope.
Does anyone know any of these, what we would probably call politically extreme websites that many people, this is their major news of the day? Anybody know any of these websites that are sort of out on the edge? If you know, there's a conservative website, the Breitbart website is there's conspiracy theories, Hillary Clinton is dead and things of this nature. And you can find similar websites on the liberal side as well. You could actually say that this year that the pressure on the media has even intensified more than it is. Blaze, thank you, Carrie. That's another site. At many, if you watch Trump rallies, he often points to the media and says, "What an awful group of people," and the crowd boos. When candidates, and this is on all sides, I can assure you that when candidates say something that later becomes unpopular or unpolitical, it's very easy to say, well, the media misquoted. The media is fixed. The media misquoted me. And as you know, this year, the Donald Trump organization, there have been press credentials denied to the Washington Post and other major news organizations. So the media is a target, and it's interesting. We will explore whether from your end, and Val, you're going to pick up from here, I think, and let's do a little discussion. Do we think that's valid? So Val, take it away. It's yours.
Thanks. Yeah, so we have a couple questions posed for you all on the screen, and if you just want to, type out your answers and kind of give us your opinions about how you have viewed the media this election season. Do you think that it's been prejudiced towards certain candidates against other candidates, and specifically looking at our major party candidates right now, what do you think the media's treatment of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have been? And we'll give it, 30 seconds or so for people to pose some ideas, and then we'll have some follow-up. I think certainly depending on the networks that you might tune into, there will be a perception of how a candidate is viewed. I think if you just look through the gamut of cable news networks, you go from MSNBC to Fox, you're going to see different views of each of the candidates. But this is actually the perfect kind of segue into the next section on, okay, so what do we do with the concept of media and how do we translate that into the classroom?
So I would again encourage Val, the point, Carrie, again, point well take. Val, why don't you answer these rather than me? Go ahead. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, I think Carrie just added a great comment. Not all candidates have been treated equally. Trump has had 24/7 coverage, whether promoting him positively or negatively. Third-party candidates have rarely been or at all covered. Yeah, it's a great point. I think the novelty of Trump's campaign, certainly in the beginning, was something that the media was attracted to because it was a novelty. They didn't know where it was going to go, and I think as more and more serious it became, the media followed. So, Carrie, I think you make a great point. What about the Clinton campaign? If anyone has any thoughts on that. Oh, Susan jumped in. I don't know that the media has treated either candidate fairly. Coverage is on the extremes, not on the substance. That is a great point. I think in the previous webinar, the discussion was around the fact that so much coverage of this campaign has been on the scandals and the personalities and the tweets and not on the policy and the policy positions. And that has been such a shift from previous presidential campaigns. And Susan added, if there's substance.
Could I ask you, and I'll desperately try to ask the question neutrally here, do you think all of the candidates legitimately want attention to be totally focused on policy? Is that something that you would sense that candidates want?
That is an interesting question. And I would be curious what, how all the participants feel. I think that I certainly would think that one campaign is more interested on talking points and just statements rather than fleshed out policies. And Carrie said, my gut says Trump doesn't, but Clinton does. Yeah, if you think back to that first presidential debate, whichever side you land on in this election, Clinton was trying to make it very clear, go to my website, see my plan, see my policy, here's how I'm going to do this, and really tried to keep it to, here are my issues, and here's what I'm going to do about them. And I would argue that I don't know that the Trump campaign has done that as well.
And could I just ask you, Val, or Alyssa, or anybody here, what's interesting to me is, on one hand, Trump has had more, I would guess no one would deny that he has more press coverage than any other candidate. Yet at the same time, it's interesting that he would argue that the press is completely stacked against him. So there's, to me, an interesting sort of little mix there. He's getting most of the attention. Everyone would agree with that, but at the same time, his campaign would argue the entire press is out to get him.
Sure.
All right, so do you want to, let's move on a little bit to some materials or some discussion on detecting bias. And I think, Alyssa, you're up here, I believe.
Yes, this is me. All right, so here is an article I found from a news source, and I want you to read it. The headline is in blue, and then that's the first paragraph of the article in black. So just read it over and tell me what you think, if you think it's more of a conservative paper or more of a liberal paper, or their thoughts on Trump, anything like that. Steve, do you see any responses? Because I don't have any on my end.
Seems liberal is one response.
Yes. Oh, it just all came up now. Yeah, you guys are right. This is from the Huffington Post. It was an editorial. But this just kind of demonstrates that, well, first of all, how easy it is sometimes to pick out the bias. I mean, I picked an extreme example, but this really demonstrates how newspapers will try to spin a story and try to get their point across and are biased. Steve, can you go to the next slide, please? So now to really demonstrate this, here are two articles side by side talking about the exact same thing. And I want you to see which one do you think is liberal and which one do you think is conservative. Steve, do you have any responses? Again, mine's blinking.
Yeah, the left quote is conservative and the right one is liberal.
Okay. So these responses are coming in very late on my end.
Liberal on the right. Yeah, you're getting conservative, liberal. You're getting responses.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see them now. Yeah, you're right. The one on the left is the conservative end. Now it's from Fox News. And the one on the right is from Washington Post, excuse me. So they're literally talking about the exact same topic, which is Donald Trump's taxes, but the more conservative side, Fox News, is really trying to play it off as not a big deal. But on the other end, on the Washington Post end, the liberal end, they're saying this is huge. And I picked these two on purpose because they both use the term bombshell. That this whole the tax returns were a bombshell and then they're just trying to decide what the effects of it are. And that, again, you could see they're talking about the exact same thing, but they're spinning the story in their own way to cater to their audience and to what they want their view to be. Next slide, please. So these are the resources. The first one is fair.org. It is a good source, a good how-to instruction guide for detecting bias, which you could probably give to your students. The bottom one, the Business Insider, is actually a spectrum that they made out depicting who's far conservative, who's far liberal, and everything in between. So you can see where every major news outlet lies. The three on the bottom were the headlines that I used. So if you want to read the full article, you want to use this in your classroom, there they are. And next slide, please. Allison, I think this is you.
Could I ask all of you and the people watching this a question? And I'd be really interested in this. That what some people in the media have decided this year, that in normal years the media wants to be unbiased. The media wants to be not taking a side. But some people in mainstream media have decided, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, just stating, that Donald Trump is so far out of what we could accept as president. In this unique year, they have a duty to speak out against him. That regardless of objectivity, that the thought of this is media members that are saying this, that the thought of Donald Trump as a president is so outlandish that they have a duty to speak out against him. Now, my question to you is there any validity to this? Or is that totally abdicating the position of an objective journalist? I mean, this is a very interesting point. They would say, to repeat myself, in a normal year, we're going to try to be biased. This election, it's so different. We can't let Trump get elected, so we have to kind of speak out in ways we've never spoken out before. Val, you study this stuff a lot. Is there any? What would be your opinion of that particular argument? Or
sorry, I was muted for coughing.
What's your thought of that? That this election is different. That if I mean, again, it's Donald Trump opponents in the media. that this year we have a duty to speak out against Donald Trump. We can't let that happen. Is that the job? Is that the job of the media, or should the media, despite what they think of Donald Trump, remain objective? I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that you're right. You've hit on kind of a unique thing with this election, is that you have very conservative news agencies that are coming out and endorsing Hillary Clinton, and they've been endorsed a Democrat in 200 some years. You have USA Today, who is coming out to endorse Clinton, or to not endorse Trump, and they have never endorsed a candidate. And so you're seeing this happen more and more. And I think when you look at the media, you've got to look at both sides of it, the news reporting side and the editorial side, and be able to address both components of that with students, because this is coming from that editorial side where they do make statements and make opinions about where they stand politically. So I think, go ahead.
What's unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your view, I guess, happened this year is there's even people on the who on the news side even have said, look, this guy is so far outside the pale that we have to call him out on it. We can't allow this to happen. Is that the job of a journalist, is my question, a news journalist?
You know, if I can jump in on this, you bring up the interesting point is, what's their job? I immediately think of our discussion about, should a teacher if they're teaching a class, is it their responsibility to remain completely objective, or should they talk about their opinion? And then going off of that, the difference between giving an opinion and teaching an opinion, I feel like there's some parallels with media, that media is allowed to have an opinion. There's news sources for every type of person out there. There's a lot of conservative sources, there's a lot of liberal sources, but as long as you're aware of those biases, the biases that are held by others, it's beneficial to see who, go ahead, Allison.
No, sure. I think one of the challenges, to Alyssa's point, in dealing with the media in a contemporary setting is, if we were to teach 20th century American history and we were to teach, say, the Pentagon Papers or the Watergate scandal, would it come up in conversation with our students, hey, was Daniel Ellsberg a Democrat or a Republican? Would it come up in our conversations? You know, were Woodward and Bernstein, what were their political affiliations? Were they liberals? Were they conservative? Or were we just teaching the nature of government transparency using news media as a way of doing this objectively? And also, to what degree does bias in the contemporary media and the 21st century media delude legitimacy? And so do we have this challenge of saying, well, now that we're looking at organs of the news media, whether it's the New York Times, and people are, saying the New York Times is liberally biased, Fox News has a conservative bias, does the very act of weighing in with some sort of political predisposition, does that now dilute what accuracy we think we're getting from the media? And furthermore, as teachers, do we dilute our legitimacy if we interject any of our opinions, therefore, or not even our opinions, but if we overexert ourselves in terms of trying to defend a conservative standpoint or a democratic one? Because historically, when we look at these people, and I think Ellsberg's probably a good example here, we never question his credibility based upon his political affiliations or the validity of his journalistic work.
Could one of you respond, if you could see on the chat box, Nicole Fontaine's comment?
Sure.
It's the same thing with celebrities and how they endorse candidates. Their role is for entertainment, but they have a voice that people will want to listen to.
No, that is a really good point, Nicole. Go ahead, Steve.
So could I just ask everybody, and I think this would be an interesting conversation with kids too, even if you're a news person in the news division, even if you despise a candidate and think a candidate is the worst thing that could happen to America, is it still your duty to remain objective in your reporting? Now, we're not talking about members of the editorial page staff. We're talking about news staff. Should you still remain biased or unbiased, or should, what would be your thoughts on that? This certainly would be, I think, an interesting topic for further consideration. I think you're up, Allison.
Yeah, so, I mean, to kind of piggyback off of the question you just asked, Steve, about, you know, should the news media stay biased or unbiased, and, you know, what's the correct way of dealing with information and disseminating that information. And Carrie has said, you know, unbiased is the way to go, and we as educators, I think, for the most part, in teaching the election, say that, you know, being unbiased or at least not super transparent to what our political beliefs are is incredibly important. Advertising comes in, though, as a component in the electoral cycle of being something that is very purposely and consciously biased, right? It serves the exact opposite purpose that we think the news media is supposed to, you know, that these organs like the New York Times are supposed to be paragons of unbiased information, and that advertising is kind of the area where we go to have biases. In the 21st century, we see this sort of weird blending of both advertising and media, and news media in particular. And if we look at semi-political, particularly internet-based news media sources, like, for example, I know my students read BuzzFeed, which is an online kind of news organization, semi-news organization, but their news stories are paid for by agencies, by providers. So, for example, Ford will pay them to write a news story about the top 10 benefits of having a hybrid vehicle, right? And then at the bottom it'll say sponsored by Ford. And people who work at these organizations, at least the ones I've spoken with, don't seem to really have any kind of ethical issue in blending advertising and news media in the 21st century. However, advertising wasn't necessarily always a major component of political campaigns. Smut campaigning has been in existence forever, since the dawn of time. And, you know, you can look at the election of 1800 or the Andrew Jackson election in the 1820s, where you're going to get, you know, political information that is incredibly biased, but there's no advertising agency, there's no business, there's no product placement associated with the information that's being disseminated, especially if it's negative and you're running a negative campaign. And Steve, if you could switch the slide for me. When we get, and this is important, we're trying to historicize the importance of advertising and the role it plays in news and in stacks and the way we receive information. A gentleman named Rosser Reeves in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and he incidentally, if anybody ever watches Mad Men, the character of Don Draper is actually modeled off of Rosser Reeves, who was a giant in the advertising industry. After the Second World War, there's, and I'm sure many of you teach this if any of you teach U.S. history, a very sharp turn in favor of consumer culture. You know, the automotive industry, the economy was really great after World War II, all this kind of stuff. So product placement became a very important component to day-to-day life in the United States, a major component of the economy. And also people had money to spend. The television set to this particular equation, and you have a real recipe for advertising agencies to take off. And Rosser Reeves is the first to really manipulate the campaign space as far as this is concerned. I gave you folks a quote that's kind of fun to use if you do nows or anything like that, that you must make the product interesting, not just make the ad different. And this was kind of Reeves' philosophy in putting together the 1952 Eisenhower election campaign. He did all of the television ads for Dwight D. Eisenhower and really tried to fashion Eisenhower. This is the first time historically an advertising, a business consumer agency had its hand in fashioning an image of a political figure. And he wanted to make sure that Eisenhower was portrayed in these ads as a strong, kind of forthright, he was a military guy, right? killed the Nazis, defeated the Nazis, but accessible and friendly leader. And the commercials that Reeves developed included your sort of average Joe asking a question to Eisenhower. You know, there'd just be a guy, and it would be just, you know, one screenshot and say, you know, Mr. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, what do you think about relations with Russia? And then the ad would cut to Eisenhower, who didn't wear glasses, by the way. He wore glasses normally, but in the campaign ads, right, they said, take your glasses off. So you look more like put together, so people think you're stronger, not weak. And he would, you know, Eisenhower would look into the camera and he would address these questions directly. And it's a formula that we actually still use in town hall Q&As when we see sometimes presidential debates where questions get opened up to the audience. This format comes directly from Rosser Reeves' Eisenhower commercial during the 1952 election. So something that is political now for us that we use in the 21st century actually has its roots in consumer culture, in advertising. So there's this real interesting shift in the way that we perceive our candidates after World War II. And Steve, if you could change the slide for me. Thanks.
Could I just say one thing? If you're interested in seeing any of these campaign ads, we've talked about this site before. The site, The Living Room Candidate, would be a site that if you want to see 1952 ads or 2012 ads from all the presidential candidates, the elections are there.
Yeah, and we can't emphasize enough the fact that the modern media, especially television, really changes the nature of the way that factual information and image and political parties and campaigns, not only those lines get blurred, but candidates become packaged as a product, right? I'm voting for Donald Trump because there's a specific set of criteria that I am branded by. I'm voting for Hillary Clinton because, you know, I'm a woman. So if I don't vote for Hillary Clinton as a woman, you know, it's my brand, right? My brand is woman. So therefore, I must vote for this particular candidate. By the 1960s, you have, and this is probably the most famous campaign ad of the 20th century, and Hillary Clinton will riff off of this in her 2008 presidential election with her 3 a.m. phone call, who you want picking up the phone ad. But the Daisy ad that Lyndon Johnson ran in 1964, and some of you may be familiar with this, is kind of this pinnacle of amazing advertising as far as political campaigns are concerned. And there's very little, there's in fact no dialogue in this particular campaign ad. It only ran once. And it is of a little girl who's picking daisies in a field, and all of a sudden, Russia, the Soviet Union, drops an atomic bomb, and then the whole world is just decimated. And the underlying message here is you need to vote for Lyndon Johnson, because if you vote for anybody else in 1964, nuclear elimination might happen. And of course, this is right after the Cuban Missile Crisis and all this kind of stuff. But Lyndon Johnson becomes now branded by this Daisy commercial with deterring or stopping even the Cold War, right? So he is now branded as the candidate of American democracy and peace, just from one campaign ad. And this is a sort of revolutionary concept. Now, over time, though, what ends up happening with individuals like Johnson is the idea of us not getting attacked by a nuclear weapon becomes associated with political figures because of the advertising campaigns sometimes that predated their election. You can change the slide, please. Exercises that are really useful in working with students and kind of unpacking political campaign ads, specifically ones that were meant for television if you're teaching U.S. history. What images, observable factors, you know, can you break this down into what images are being shown? Is there the cinematic term like a mise-en-scène? Is there a focus point, a focus image in a particular campaign ad? In the case of the Daisy ad for Johnson, there's two major images. There's the Daisy itself, right, and then there's the atomic bomb. So you can just take those two visuals, and the idea is the American public will put them together and create their own narrative to an extent. What kind of music is being played? Again, going back to the Daisy ad, there's no music. The only sound that you get is the sound of a nuclear bomb, and preceding that of the young girl playing with daisies, I believe she's whistling. And who is in the ad, right? You have men, you have women, you have the actual candidate themselves. Going back again to the Daisy ad, you have a very innocent, young girl picking daisies in a field. You could even unpack that further with more advanced level classes and say, well, it's 1964. Where is the black children at, right? Are there any Hispanic children in this ad? Who's missing? And as much as what's there, another thing I would add to this slide that's not on there is what's not there. You know, what are these advertisers not hitting on? And then, of course, you have implied factors that you can have students identify. You could create graphic organizers or guided viewing sheets for this. But what message is trying to be conveyed? Who's the audience? You know, who are these people? Who are these advertisers speaking to? You know, Rosser Reeves with Eisenhower is definitely speaking to the sort of middle-class American that comes out of product that really does come out of the World War II generation and the GI Bill and low interest rates for housing. How is this candidate being portrayed? What are they wearing? Is it a Ted Cruz situation where there's jeans and T-shirts and cowboy boots, or is it a Hillary Clinton power suit, or is it a Donald Trump Armani type of situation? You know, what is being portrayed here? What kind of image? Is somebody wearing a flag pin? Are they not wearing a flag pin? Are they wearing a United Nations pin with their American flag pin? I mean, you could really get very detailed, almost like a Magic Eye or the old Highlights magazine I Spy games. You know, you could even pair an old activity like that from a Highlights magazine with something like this. And is the overall tone negative or positive in an ad? You know, can you get an idea of, is this a happy-go-lucky type of thing? Or in the case of the Daisy ad, right? I mean, what is this? It's very dark, kind of twisted advertisement. And that's one of the reasons that it only ran once. Stephen, do you have anything to add? Oh.
No,
So
you hit it all.
So two campaign ads from, well, one of them from 2016, but has some clips that go back a little further. That's the Hillary Clinton ad, and then a Donald Trump ad. So we're going to play these for you guys to sort of compare and use some of those strategies we just talked about in guided viewing.
Before you start the video, just to let you know, I've actually used this on a 5th grade class. So this works for younger ages, and it could be done for like even 4th or even 3rd if you really wanted to. It would just obviously need more guidance. So this is just like, this is something that could be a strategy that could be used with all ages.
One of the areas that I've been particularly interested in is the area of children. All of us have a responsibility to ourselves, to our children, to each other. We intend to be sure that everybody in this room and every child in this state is somebody, no matter where they're born, no matter to whom they are born. Our children's future is safe, both by the values of their parents and the policies of their nation. It's time to protect the next generation, fill the lives of our children with possibility and hope. Open up the doors so that every child has a chance to live up to his or her God-given potential. I've spent my life fighting for children, families, and our country, and I'm not stopping now. I'm Hillary Clinton, and I've always approved this message.
So I'd be curious to know what you all thought, if you wanted to comment in the chat box about the Hillary Clinton ad. You know, what strategies do you think were effective in that particular advertisement? Was there anything that you thought was not effective in that advertisement? It also might be worthwhile, too, to look at, because this is a retrospective of Clinton, you know, what kinds of places is she speaking at? You know, she was in front of a podium for the good, you know, 50% of her earlier clips that they used here. And, you know, you might say, well, what kind of audience is she speaking to? And often in the context of this particular advertisement, you see her in front of the Wellesley podium. You see her in front of the University of New Hampshire podium. You see her in front of, so she's clearly speaking to a college-educated demographic of individual. I mean, these are, kind of little things that you can spy. Let's see what Trump has to say.
And could I comment here, Allison, that that most people who are studying this say that the group that Hillary Clinton desperately has to win to win this thing, that win this year, would be college-educated women. And I would say, would you agree that the attempted audience for this ad is right there?
Correct.
Another comment.
There's a level of Bernie Sanders nostalgia to this as well, like going back in civil rights marches. There's a certain continuity there. Yeah, Alyssa.
I just find it ironic. I mean, I've seen this commercial more times than I want to. It's on all the time. At least I see it all the time. And one of the things I always find ironic about this commercial, I'm not trying to be political here, is I don't see any children in this commercial. I just see Hillary Clinton talking about children, which I find kind of ironic. But maybe that's just me. Thanks for finding that funny.
They're all in government-funded daycare. It's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, on to the Donald Trump one.
Yeah, so Donald Trump, slightly different form here. So we have our great tagline, Make America Great Again, which, you could also unpack political slogans, campaign slogans as well. What does it mean to make America great again, right? If you are a woman in 1910, do you really want to be a woman in 1910 with no vote? Do you really want to be a voter, an African-American voter in the United States in the 1950s, right? Do you want to be a gay person in the United States in the 1970s? Do you really want to make America great again? What demographic does this idea, does this slogan appeal to? And same for Hillary Clinton with her children campaign. She's families, college-educated people, younger people who are trying to start families, paternity leave is now an issue for younger families, right? Fathers getting time off. So you can even unpack the verbiage that you see in a lot of these. I'd be curious to know what you guys, oh yeah, go ahead.
An interesting question, by the way, if you want to unpack the Donald Trump message, which is a constant, is let's make America great again. A question that you kind of alluded to, Allison, is what era do we want to go back to? If
Right.
the question is let's make America great again, great like when? The 1970s, the 1950s? That, I think, is an interesting question to address with kids as well.
Yeah, and you could do a lot of fun activities using just that one slogan to see, what students thought, in their opinion, was the greatest era that the United States had ever been sort of a part of, the 1776.
Or what candidate Trump and his followers would think is the greatest era in American history.
Yeah, it's fun because there's a lot more flexibility often with some of the Trump campaign materials than there is. The Hillary Clinton stuff is very, it lacks an abstract quality, so you can't play around with it as much. The Trump campaign lends itself really well to asking questions and doing Q&As, and not in a biased way at all. He kind of asks these questions that make it the territory very fertile for lesson planning and development.
I think Val McVeigh is going to share some resources with us.
Yep. So based on our conversation today about media and understanding bias and then just the election in general, I thought it would be helpful just to give you all some resources you might be familiar with, some that are new to you, but just some general things that you could use in your classroom tomorrow if you're looking for things to help you teach the election and as we wrap up this webinar series. The first is a series of lesson plans from iCivics.org. You might be familiar with iCivics for their civic-oriented games. They have about 13 free games for kids on their website, but they also have an entire suite of lesson plans that cover basically any topic you would find in a traditional civics course or American government course. And they have a series of short lessons on the media, starting with something called the public sphere. You look at what the public is, what the public agenda is, who sets it, what is public opinion, and how does that all relate to public policy, and then getting into, okay, now that you know what the public is, what is the media? And then from there, okay, well, what are interest groups? And then in that lesson plan, you look at current interest groups, and they use a scenario of a typical school lunch and what might be the role of an interest group in some of the foods that are served in America's public schools. And then it follows up with propaganda and what are different types of propaganda, and then looking at examples. The neat thing about iCivics lesson plans is they pretty much all follow a universal format. So if you've seen one, you can download a different one and you'll know it kind of has the same structure. Everything is all included. So I wanted to make you aware of that if it's something you've only used their site for games. And I think, Steve, you can go on to the next slide. So the museum, you probably have seen this website, but buried in their site is something called Today's Front Pages. They capture every single front page from newspapers across the country, and they do it every day. But the neat thing is after today, they will take down today's front pages and put up tomorrow's, and so yesterday's are gone. But what they did do is they've archived certain dates that have had some significance. So, and this is starting from back in 2003. So the latest archived page you can find was the Columbia shuttle explosion back in 2003. But since then, they have captured certain important dates in the past 13, 14 years. So the Boston Marathon bombings, Hurricane Katrina coverage and anniversaries, police shootings that happened over this summer, and September 11th anniversaries. And I mention that because, and Steve, you can move on, one of the things that we do in teaching the elections, which in a state like Florida can be highly controversial, so we often have to look back to historical elections or to start the conversation. And so one of the things that we've done is even just pulling up the last presidential, the day after, some of the headlines from newspapers from around the country, and just using a paper from The Villages, which is a small town in Florida, versus in a small town in Illinois, to two bigger cities in Boston and then in Nebraska. Just even looking at the front pages, you can have a conversation about bias and what might this paper and therefore this community tell you about how they may have voted. If you look at the Telegraph from Alton, Illinois, which is a very small town across the Mississippi from St. Louis, it's Obama again, versus the Boston Herald paper, which is a full page, full color, very excited advertisement for the election results. So Newsiums, Today's Front Pages, a great resource to check out. The next resource is the National Archives obviously has a wealth of resources to teach a variety of topics. I've actually used their catalog from their records of the War Production Board to teach propaganda, to use that as a starting place before using more current advertisements or issues. So they have many, many different downloadable images of war posters that you can use to introduce the concepts of propaganda transfer and symbolism, name calling, all of those different things. This is also helpful, could be in your ELA classrooms if your colleagues are doing some of those same benchmarks that pop up in language arts. So the National Archives can be difficult to navigate if you're looking for certain resources. So I can type in my email address. If there's anything like this that you're looking for, I can help you do that. The last couple of things I wanted to share are really just general election resources you may have seen once. They might be good to revisit. USA Today has a candidate match game, which is a really neat way if you want your students to think about where do they fall on certain issues and where do I match up. They include candidates that did not get the nomination, which I think could be a valuable conversation of, well, I don't exactly line up with Hillary Clinton. I'm actually more closely aligned to some of the ideas that Bernie Sanders had. Or, you know, I don't necessarily fall in line with Trump's message, but I'm closer to Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz. So it provides you with some of the candidates that did run but did not get the nomination. In thinking about some of the down ballot contests, the EMKI Edward Kennedy Institute has a Senate election wall with information and a map on the 34 seats up in this November. So obviously there is information on our own Senate race happening in Connecticut, but that's just kind of an interactive, interesting way to look at the Senate races if you want to cover that in addition to the presidential race. C-SPAN Classroom has a wide library of video clips on all different topics in covering the election, from candidates to campaign finance, the Electoral College, and just political parties in general. The nice thing about their video library, most clips are under 5 minutes, which is really nice if you want to preview it and create an activity around it. You're not having to watch a 40-minute video and then figure out what clip you want to use. Most of them are under 5 minutes, but I don't think any of the clips are longer than 9 minutes. And then Teaching Tolerance posted a blog about teaching this election and deals with some of the questions you might get in your classroom. So why am I hearing candidates use language that we're not even allowed to say in the classroom, let alone at my house? Or am I going to be deported if one candidate is elected? So what I thought might be helpful is if you are facing these questions and you're looking for guidance, this blog has been helpful for some teachers to kind of give you ideas of how to deal with those questions, resources to use, and things to do when you get some of those controversial issues in your class. And then finally, 2 other resources to make you aware of. The Civics Renewal Network is a pretty new organization. They have pretty much taken all of the resources from every major civic organization, civics education organization around the country, and created a library of lesson plans. So from the National Constitution Center to street law to the American Bar Association, they have condensed basically the best of their stuff into one resource list. It's great and helpful if you're looking for some different things. And then finally, Newsela or Newsela, as some people call it, have a new site called Students Vote 2016. And what they have done is paired election topics together. So for example, they take immigration and the refugee crisis and put those 2 issues together and provide some discussion prompts and activities if you want to talk about those. They do election or education and criminal justice, healthcare and climate change, gender equality and income inequality, and they have text sets on each of these issues. And if you are familiar with this website, each of the texts that they have on each issue comes in 4 different Lexile levels. So you can differentiate your instruction very easily if you want to do some current events reading and discussion using Newsela. And those are some resources. And I will type in my email if there's anything people want more information on. I'll be more than happy to share it with you.
Thank you.
Sure.
And this, regrettably, I mean, we've talked about this all 3 of our sessions, but the unique challenges, and I don't know who it was, but if it was Allison or Alyssa or someone made the comment that some of the exact challenges, the sort of mental challenges that some reporters, you know, that line that we just can't stand back and let this happen or that happen, so those are exactly the challenges that some teachers are facing. And you know, I've heard from numerous, more than a couple, but numerous schools in Connecticut that they're doing less on the election this year. That because of the perceived conflict, because of the perceived, you know, difficulties or, you know, a controversy of this election, that they're doing less with the election. I wonder, is that the right approach? You know, just if the Trump-Hillary thing is too controversial and causes too much controversy, then just don't talk about it. Anyone, Alyssa, Allison, Val, anyone comment on that? Is that a good strategy, by the way, from a teacher? Allison, Nori, you're a first-year teacher. Is that a good strategy if this is going to cause hassle in our classrooms, if it's going to cause controversy in our classroom, then just don't talk about it?
I have the good fortune of, as a first-year teacher, not being a young one, but also being in a district that's supportive of teaching the election. So, you know, for my specific set of circumstances, I think any opportunity to teach how to deal with bias, how to use source material and read through biases and what is, you know, how do we find things that are factual and how do we differentiate things. Would I go so far as to, you know, say who I was voting for, give my political affiliation? No. But I think that any good educator, any good news person, for that matter, would remain, you know, sheltered as far as that's concerned. But I don't see I haven't come across any reason thus far to avoid teaching the election for the sake of having no conflict.
Val,
I also enjoy conflict.
Val, are you still on?
Yep, I'm still here.
I know you're on the way out, but could you tell us from a Florida perspective, what would be a Florida response to that? If it causes controversy, don't talk about it.
Sure. I think it really depends on the district you teach at, probably just like in Connecticut, but certainly in Florida. And because I work for an organization that does civics education K-12, I can tell you there are districts that are mandated that they will not teach the election at all. So teachers don't deal with it, even in civics classrooms. So that is a challenge we are working on in Florida of how do you teach it and how can you prepare students, even though it can be deemed controversial in your community.
And I could tell you there are Connecticut districts, and I won't tell you what they are, where teachers at all levels, by the way, elementary, middle, and high, have been instructed not to teach the election this year. So that's a challenge that civic education faces in general. Could I just go ahead?
Sorry, can I just add something to that? I find it very interesting. So being an elementary school teacher, I find that there are a lot of issues that people tend to ignore at that age. A lot of controversial issues. For example, like racism, that is completely not even thought about in the curriculum. But what I always find with that, as with this election, controversial issues, yes, but kids face this all the time. they're either going to get their information from the teachers, or they're going to get it from media and the internet or their parents. So either way, they're going to get information about issues, even if, no matter how controversial they are, especially with social media and the World Wide Web. So the irony of it is do we as teachers, if we have the control, do we ignore the issues and pretend they don't exist, or do we just try to hit them head on?
Well, and you realize that many of these decisions are not made at the teacher level.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm fully aware that
many of these decisions are not made by individual teachers. They're made by administrators.
Exactly. No, I am absolutely aware of that. It's just an interesting inquiry, if you will.
I emailed everybody this, I think, last night. If you didn't get this, email me and I'll send it again. This is a guide. If you didn't get it, send it to me. There's 13 questions, and there's 13 questions, and every election since 1960, since 1980, excuse me, you or the class answers each of these yes or no. And since 1980, this is a remarkably accurate way to judge who's going to win a presidential election. This has worked every year since 1980. I think if it's 5 or, is it 5 or I think
it's half.
If it's half, which way? Do you remember? Does he remember, Allison?
I think it's like 7, like 6 or 7.
Right, but you can look on the bottom of the sheet. But this is a way, perhaps, to play with classes on just predicting if this is an accurate way to predict the election. It has been every election since 1980, and see if it works for this one. An interesting question, and this is going to be our last thing today, is I would love it, and this is, I would like everybody here, regardless if you're a panelist, regardless if you're listening, regardless of who you're for, regardless of who you want to win, just for fun, could I ask you to write in the chat box, who do you think who do you think's going to win this election? I'd be curious, and I want, if people could just write in, just for fun, who do you think's going to win? We've got one for Secretary Clinton. Oh, we've got, look at this, Hillary.
Interesting.
Interesting.
You know, while people are typing in, we did the similar webinar series for the National Council for Social Studies, and it was right after it was during actually the two conventions, and there was definitely more of a mix of who people thought were going to win, but now I'm seeing more Clinton than anything else.
But you know, a difference with that, Allison, was too, remember, that was a more national audience.
That was a different demographic, absolutely.
Right. By the way, one interesting or perhaps comment that you may find interesting is in a lot of schools, and teachers have mentioned this, that oftentimes teachers would be also teaching, as they should, the down races. You know, somebody's running for Senate in our state. You know, there's congressional races in our state. It's interesting this year with so much emphasis and so much interest in the presidential race that in a lot of places the down races are not being taught to the level they usually are, and that's a shame. But I think with the interest in the Hillary-Trump race, perhaps that's the reason. So I think regrettably we're at 1:08 here. So this series has been great fun. You will, by the way, if you want the resources for this webinar today, if you didn't quite get a website or something like that, as soon as this is over, I'm going to send out the link for today's webinar. We're going to send out a link so you can get any resources. And we've got a webinar series, I know many of you know about it, coming up, and this is going to be done in conjunction with Yale University, a 3-part webinar series about teaching about the Middle East. If you have interest in that, email me and I'll put you on the list for that. All right, Allison, Alyssa, last comments. Who's going to win the election, Allison? I'm putting her on the spot. Alyssa, who's going to win the election here?
I think it's going to be Hillary.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Johnson?
Gary Johnson, right. What is Aleppo, right? What is Aleppo? The fascinating thing, by the way, that I don't know that we know yet is what will be the response to whoever wins. What will be the response of the other side? What will be the response of Donald Trump supporters to a Hillary Clinton win? What will be the response of Hillary Clinton supporters to a Donald Trump win? I mean, I think, candidate Trump has oftentimes said if he loses, he said this, that the system is rigged. It's rigged for him to lose. If his supporters believe that, it would be interesting to see what their response would be in the days and weeks after Election Day. And it would equally be interesting if you are a vehement Hillary Clinton supporter, how those folks are going to do with a President Trump. But that's for a future discussion, and that's for another day. So you'll get this. We hope this was interesting and valuable to you, and good. By the way, if you're a Connecticut teacher listening to this and you want and you offer more resources, if you have other cool ideas or cool resources that nobody's mentioned here, email them to me and I'll send them out to the larger group. So let's keep, and if you got other ideas, email me and I'll send them to the larger group. Let's keep this dialogue going. Thanks to everybody for their participation. And
Thank you, everybody.
Allison and Alyssa, thank you for helping to facilitate these. Greatly appreciate it.
And thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. This is great.
Have a great day, folks. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.